Our gospel reading this morning continues us along the way as we're moving through this portion of Matthew. We come now to the part of the book where Matthew has chosen to lump together, to bring together in one place many of the sayings of Jesus in what's commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus probably didn't preach all of these sayings at one time, but rather Matthew has collected them into verses that encompass chapters 5, 6, and 7. So here the beginning of this part of Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between provide us with a glimpse of your vision. Amen. I just had the delightful experience of co-teaching a 3-week course with Rabbi Myra Soifer of Temple Bat Yam and Imam Abdul Haq Muhammad from Fort Myers. Our presentations focused around 3 topics in particular: our own personal faith journeys, perspectives on women in each of our traditions, and matters of war and peace. Along the way, however, we managed to touch on a number of other issues as well. In one of his presentations, Imam Muhammad spoke a bit about the Islamic understanding of the afterlife, especially the afterlife as it awaits the faithful. In the Quran, the Holy Scriptures of Islam, that afterlife is depicted as taking place in a lush garden referred to as paradise. In the Hadith, a collection of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings and stories about him, believers are reminded, however, that no one really knows the details of what lies beyond, because paradise is a place that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no heart has conceived. We might call it heaven as opposed to paradise, but I suppose most Christians would concur that it's not a place that's been known or seen. Yes, there are those who claim to know the particulars. There are books like 90 Minutes in Heaven and Heaven is for Real, books that purport to reveal the secrets of the afterlife. But I find myself far more concerned about the here and now. And while I do believe in some sort of an afterlife, I'm willing to leave those details to God. And apparently, so did Jesus. For when he speaks about the kingdom of heaven, he's not really talking about the world to come, but rather he's talking about this world. For the kingdom of heaven, Jesus suggests, is all about living according to the will of God. It is all about seeking to live as God would have us live right here, right now, on good old planet Earth. In fact, Jesus says, when we live in God's way of love, we can get a glimpse of heaven. In many ways, our passage this morning is all about those glimpses of heaven. For with these familiar words, commonly called the Beatitudes, Jesus paints a picture of heaven on earth. Jesus shows us a vision of life, not only as it could be, but as it should be. Now, maybe you memorized these verses as a child. I did. But I certainly didn't understand them back in 5th grade. And even now, I find them so deep, so full of wisdom, that they can be mined over and over and over again for the goodness that they contain. These Beatitudes, as they're commonly called, are at the beginning of what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. This collection of Jesus' sayings about what it means to be one of his followers, what it means to travel the heavenly path. In the text, Jesus is portrayed as delivering this sermon to a vast crowd. Perhaps as he looks over the assembled, he spots a man who is poor, a grieving widow, someone hiding behind a friend because they're so shy. Blessed, he says, pointing at each of them, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. The word translated here as blessed comes from the Greek word makarios. What it means is sharing in the life of God. That's what it means to be blessed, to share in the life of God. Those who are blessed are those who share life with the Holy One. And that, says Jesus, that doesn't have to wait until you die. That, he says, can and does happen in this realm, in this world. Here, now, one can share life with God. One can indeed catch a glimpse of heaven. One can participate in God's vision. One can be blessed. Okay, you're saying, okay, Jesus, so far, so good. I like this idea. But then he begins to detail the particulars, and it's there that we really honestly get a little thrown off. For those that he calls blessed are folks we might even call cursed. How often do you consider being poor as being blessed? How often do you look at someone actively grieving and speak of them as blessed? And those who are meek, those who are hungry, thirsty, persecuted, reviled, blessed? Okay, we can see how being pure or merciful or peacemakers might carry with it a measure of blessing, but all those other ways of being in the world are blessed? I realize you might be thinking, if that's what's required for being blessed, then just thanks but no thanks. Not for me. But that's the list. That's the stuff you memorized back in Sunday school. That's what the man said. So what does he mean? Many, many volumes have been written on the Beatitudes, and over the course of my own ministry, I've preached more than one 7 or 8 part series on the Sermon on the Mount, these few verses in particular. There's much to glean from them on a verse by verse by verse basis. But I do think that they have something in common. I do think in some ways Jesus is saying the exact same thing over and over and over again. Look at them a bit more closely, and perhaps you too will see the common thread. Blessed, Jesus begins, are the poor in spirit. He's not saying it's good to be without the material things you need to survive. No, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who aren't so full of themselves that there's no room left for God. Blessed are those who are willing to let go of ego and instead make space in their souls for the Holy One. Blessed are those who clean out all the junk in the condominiums of their lives so they can have space for a new roommate to move in. To be blessed, you see, you must be willing to let go of ego. You must let go of the idea that it's all about you, 'cause it ain't. Blessed are those who mourn, he says. Not that it's easy to lose someone close and dear. Jesus knew full well grief can pull you apart. It can tear you to shreds. But when you grieve, when you mourn, that's most often when you come to realize that you need the other. That your life isn't all about you, but rather that it's incomplete without the love of others, without the love of God. To be blessed, you must be like those who mourn. You must let go of the notion that you can be sufficient unto yourself. Jesus goes on, blessed are the meek. Meek? Really? Who wants to be meek? Who wants to be Casper Milquetoast or Uriah Heep? Yet Jesus isn't talking about being spineless. To me, meek, you see, in the Greek means to be obedient. Obedient to God. To be obedient is to let go of trying to micromanage your own life and to live a life that is God-centered, a life that is God-controlled, if you will. Blessed are the meek. And the list goes on. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, who are merciful, who are pure in heart, who are peacemakers. Even those who are persecuted and reviled and slandered because of their connection to Jesus, all those folks, he says, are blessed. And you see, every single one of them on that list, every single one has to let go of something. Ego, self-sufficiency, self-will, indifference, the need to be right, petty things that sully the soul, a sense of entitlement, the need for approval, all have to be let go. You see, as long as any of those things dominate your life, there is little space left for the Holy One. The Beatitudes, in the end, are all about letting go. Letting go of the false belief that you are in charge. Letting go of the false belief that you always know best. And instead, making room in your soul for the reign, for the rule of God. What Matthew calls the kingdom of heaven. Later in his gospel, Matthew records many parables which begin, "The kingdom of heaven is like." Often those parables are about letting go of the false and making room for that which is true and whole and real, that which is of God. Those parables are like a glimpse of heaven, even as the willingness to participate in interfaith conversations are like a glimpse of God's vision for us as well. For those conversations require letting go of the notion that you're always right and the other guy's always wrong. So too, I think, is this story that I share with you now, a story which, were Jesus alive today, he might tell in this way. The kingdom of heaven is like a high school student riding a crowded New York subway on his way home from school, surrounded by Middle Eastern immigrants. An Iranian woman in a hijab, a man in an Islamic skull cap, and a woman who says she's from Egypt. The three of them are strangers to each other, but share in common being Muslim immigrants. They start to share stories about their journey to America and about their jobs. The man in the Islamic skull cap tells the two women that he's part of an organization that works to prevent bias against Muslims. And he hands each of the women a pamphlet describing the organization's work. It is filled with information about preventing prejudice. At some point, the man realizes that the high school student has been listening to the whole conversation, and he turns to offer him a pamphlet as well. Oh, thank you very much, says the student, but I'm Jewish. Doesn't matter, responds the man. You have the same civil rights we all do. I took the leaflet, writes that high school student, just as the train got to my stop, with a shalom and a salam alaikum, we bid each other goodbye. The kingdom of heaven is like a high school student riding in a crowded subway train. Sisters and brothers, in one sense, I would agree with the Islamic saying about heaven, that it is something no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart conceived. Yet in another way, in another sense, I think we can and do get glimpses of heaven every single day. If we are only willing to let go of all that stands in the way of our fully embracing the way and the will of the Holy One. Yes, the kingdom of heaven stretches from here to eternity beyond our imagining. But it is also very much with us late and soon, here and now. It is present every time we work for peace and justice and liberty for all. It is present every time we say shalom. It is present every time we say salam alaikum.